interests, feel free to ask them during your talk, and they'll respond in the chat, and I can always list off the different answers.
Very good.
Okay, well, I think, Zabina, you want to go ahead and start the recording?
I just did. I am ready to go.
All right. Well, welcome, everybody. This is our first guest lecture of our quarter, of our class. And so thrilled to have everybody here. I'm your instructor, Christina Fuchs, so you actually get to see me physically now, which is quite nice. We are an online course, which is very unusual to be able to hold such a wonderful national and exciting opportunity as this, and bringing in national renowned speakers into our classroom. And that is one of the things I love most about an online class, and one of the things I'm really excited to bring this opportunity here for you guys. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to list off your names that I'm seeing here, and I'll continue to list them off as we go through the lecture, but I want to make sure I'm getting everybody so that you guys can get your credit for being here. So I'm seeing Adetola. I'm actually seeing Adetola, so great. Let's see, Amanda, Avery, Brandon, Elena, Jackie, Justin, Nicole, and I think that's Tracy Kimball. All right, so that's who I got so far. I'm sure more people will join us. Okay, so before we get started, before we introduce our speaker, Dr. Fananapazir, I want to first introduce Zabina Vaness, who you guys have, if you remember back in Module 1, I introduced Zabina and talked about the Unity Museum. And so I want to introduce Zabina. She is just amazing, amazing person, but as well as an amazing scholar who has done so much for Everett Community College in bringing in these great speakers and introducing issues on diversity, on world peace, on understanding into our curriculum. And so I'm going to give Zabina a chance to talk about the Unity Museum and what we do and how you guys can connect with it. The Unity Museum is actually in Seattle, so it's very close to where you're at. And I want to give her a chance to talk about that as well as introduce her speaker. So with that said, everybody, let's welcome Zabina. Thank you, Zabina.
Well, I guess good evening, everybody. I'm just down here in Linwood, and you're up in Everett, just practically next door. So it's just so great to have everybody here today. I wanted to share with you that you are a guest of the Uniting Hearts Academy that has gone global for about 4 years now. We are in our 5th year. But I also want to welcome you to the Unity Museum, which is right on the Ave. So some of you might be graduating over to University of Washington. So make sure you come and visit us. We are located across from the University Bookstore. So our museum deals with the topics of social change. And we have an amazing student lounge for you where we have ongoing lecture series and meetings and gatherings. So on behalf of our Unity Museum and Uniting Hearts Academy, welcome to our guest speaker today, and thank you, Christina Fuchs, for making this all happen for everybody. Have a great day.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Fananapazir. I'm a cardiologist on the East Coast, and I'm very happy to be speaking with you tonight. The subject, women and gender in the Quran or Islam, is clearly a very important subject. There are 1.2 billion Muslims in the world, and if we assume that half of them are women, the subject clearly affects 600 million women whose lives are impacted by Islam. It's also should be said at the beginning that some of the the countries with worst records in this area, 3 or 5 top ones are Muslim countries, and they are Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Somalia. It's easier for this initial part to speak about women and gender in the Quran as rather than women in Islam, as there are several Muslim sects, the Shias and several sects of the Sunni Islam, and each of them have their own traditions and take on the subject. Also, different Muslim countries treat women differently. One of the things to consider at the beginning is the background to the subject with regards to Islam. And what was the status of women, for example, before Islam came? This was a period which is called Jahiliyyah, or period of ignorance. It was a barbarous time when women had very lowly lives and were very subservient to men. And this was not only in Arabia, but also surrounding states. Women were part of men's possessions. Women were a problem. They were a burden. They were considered a burden because the tribes kept fighting each other, and if women were captured, they had to pay large sums of money to get them to be freed. So it wasn't surprising that one Arab would boast to another Arab that he killed with his own hands a female infant by burying the infant under the sand so as not to spill blood, because that has its own repercussions. The women had multiple husbands, and the husbands had multiple wives. It was a very chaotic environment. There were also two very large contingents of Jews in Medina. There were two Arab tribes and two Jewish tribes, and for several decades, up to 100 years, one Arab tribe, assisted by one of the Jewish tribe, would fought against the other Arab tribe and the other Jewish tribe. So the question again should be, what was the status of women in Judaism and in the Torah? And also, there were many Christian communities dispersed throughout Arabia. Christianity was dominant on the west in Abyssinia, the current Ethiopia, and also in the Byzantine and Roman empires. So we have to look at that background to know what was the effect of Islam on the subject. When we look at the Torah, and there's a written Torah, that's the first books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, and there is an oral Torah, which includes traditions that came about later on. Women in the Bible times at that period had little or no role in public life. There were a few exceptions, including the matriarch, Sarah, the wife of Abraham, Rebecca, the wife of Isaac, and Rachel and Leah, the wives of Jacob. There were also rare women prophets like Miriam and Deborah. Other than that, women had little or no role in public life. The marriage and family laws favored heavily the men. Only men were polygamous. They could have more than one wife. They could have concubines. Only men could divorce their wives. Virginity was valued highly because it was part of the property of man. And for example, the punishment for someone who kills a virgin is not quite the same as somebody who kills a non-virgin. But the loss of virginity had no male equivalent. It had all related to the woman. Man was the head of the household and was expected to be called Lord. He was the owner of his wife and the owner of her pregnancies. Women wholly depended economically on man. Women could not inherit land except in the case of being the only child, in which case it was mandatory that she should marry within the tribe so as not to reduce tribal property holdings. Women could not go out if they were young without the permission of their father, or if they were married without the permission of their husband. They could not testify on their own behalf in the courts. Again, very briefly, in Christianity, they were impacted by mostly epistles by St. Paul, and the church still struggles with these statements. It says, "Let your women keep silence in the churches, for it is not permitted unto them to speak." So for many centuries they've not been able to have women priests. But they are commanded to be under obedience, as also saith the law. In other words, as also says the Torah. So St. Paul is saying there's a continuation as to what was in the Torah. And if they will learn anything, let them ask their husbands at home, for it is a shame for a woman to speak in the church. He also states, "Wives, submit yourselves unto your husbands as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church. Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be subject to their husbands in everything." In other words, the gap that separated God from Christ, or Christ from the church, and the church from the man, the same large gap existed between man and woman. They were not supposed to have ornaments and show their finery in public, and they were supposed to, according to St. Paul, call their husbands Lord, as Sarah called Abraham Lord. Pretty harsh and tough environment. Now, coming to the Quran, at the last session we talked about there are moral and ethical laws to religion, and there are also social laws. The moral and ethical laws of the various religions are very similar. And in the Quran it says that the ethical and moral laws apply equally to men and women. The Quran makes large strides, as you will see, towards gender equality, but there is no parity. So here is a list of ethical issues that appear in the Quran, and the Quran makes it obvious that it applies both to men and women. Lo, men who surrender unto God, and women who surrender, means they obey God, and men who believe, in other words, in God and His revelation, and women who believe, and men who obey and women who obey, and men who speak the truth and women who speak the truth, and men who persevere in righteousness and women who persevere, and men who are humble and women who are humble, and men who give alms, charity, and women who give alms, and men who fast and women who fast, and men who guard their modesty and women who guard their modesty, and men who remember God, make mention of God much, and women who remember. These, men and women, God has prepared for them forgiveness and a vast reward. But there are differences in their social status. Not only in their social status, but in their inheritance and access to courts. And these are illustrated here. In the second chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, the chapter of the cow, it says very clearly that men are a degree more important above women, sorry. Remember, in Judaism and Christianity, women did not inherit. Here they go from 0 to now able to inherit, but only a share that was half that of a man. in the Surah Al-Nisa, which is the chapter on women, it says, unto the male a share equal to 2 females. So women did inherit, but only half. When it came to the courts, the woman can now defend herself. She has a voice in the court, but you need 2 female witnesses for every male witness. It says, and call to witness 2 witnesses from among your men, and if 2 are not 2 men, then a woman and 2 women from among those whom you approve as witnesses, so that if one of the women errs, the other can remind her. Why the men don't err, I don't know, but that's the inequality. Here is also a very famous statement in the Quran about men are in charge of women. I hope I'm not putting anybody's blood pressure up. I'm a cardiologist. I'm worried about people's blood pressure. It says men are in charge of women, and rebellious or recalcitrant wives are to be punished. Rajulu qawwamuna ala nisa. Men are upholders and maintainers of women. The word qawwamuna means they're the pillars that holds a building up, by virtue of God's favor that has made the one of them to excel the other. Now, why did they excel? Because they had more money, because they had inherited more. And so they had to spend of their property for the support of women. Somehow, the fact that they inherited more and they had more money and they spent it to support their women, this made them upholders and maintainers of women. So good women are devoutly obedient, guarding in secret that which God has guarded, in other words, their chastity. And for those from whom you fear rebellion, if there is a fear of rebellion, admonish them. And if they persist, you banish them to a different bed. And if they persist, you take it further and you azrabuhunna, you beat them. Zaraba is to beat. Now, some liberal Muslims interpret that zaraba as to leave the wife, but most Muslim scholars believe that it is in fact to do with actual beating, physical beating of the woman. But then there is a lot of discussion as to how bad should there be the beating, and some, again, liberals say that it should be with a stick no bigger than a meswak, which was the stick that they used to use to clean their teeth, and that you should not have any mark on the skin. Anyway, then if they obey you, seek not a way against them. Lo, God is exalted the greatest. So the woman is still subject to the man, but he's now inheriting and is able to speak, but he remains a degree less than a man. Now this verse is also, I chose this verse because it shows several things, and it is to do with equitable retaliation in the Quran, the law of qisas. Hammurabi, several hundred years before Moses, had said, a tooth for a tooth, and an eye for an eye, a limb for a limb. In other words, don't kill. If somebody breaks your tooth, don't go and kill him and his whole family, his cows, his donkeys and camels, but there should be equitable retaliation. That a tooth for a tooth and an eye for an eye is also part of Judaism and part of the Pentateuch. It also, because really Islam shared the same environment, desert environment, as Moses did, so the law of retaliation, equitable retaliation, also appears in the Quran. But the way it's framed in this verse, it shows that there are also distinctions between the slaves and the free, and women and men. It says,
here?
Yes?
Hi. Yeah, Christina here. We have a question from Adatola, which I think is a good question, actually. I think a lot of people, this would help them. His question is, oops, back to it. His question is, like the Bible, does the Quran have a New Testament as well as the Old? I guess, like, what is the structure of the Quran?
What is the structure of the Quran? Okay, the Quran consists of 114 chapters. All of the chapters, the 114 chapters, are divided into verses. The size of the verses vary from 4 to more than 250, and they are not in chronologic order. Half of them were revealed in Mecca, and half of them were revealed in Medina. But the Quran is a recording of exactly what Muhammad said. The Bible is somewhat different. It is made of many books written over 4 continents by several people, and so it's somewhat different. And it is not all the words of either Moses or Christ. The first part of it is the Old Testament, which is the most of the Bible, which the Jews call the Tanakh. The first 5 books are called Pentateuch, or the Torah, and then there is the New Testament, which is revered by the Christians. Does that answer the person's question?
I think it does. He'll let us know if it doesn't. Thank you, Dr. Fananapazir.
Thank you. Thank you, Adatola, for that question. So here in one of the chapters, this is the second chapter of the Quran, it says, O you who believe, the law of equitable retaliation, this is qisas. Ya ayyuhallazina amanu, kutiba alaykum, it is imperative on you, qisas, this retaliation. Fi qatla, for in the case of murder, what do you do in the case of? He says, al-hurru bil-hur, a free man for a free man, al-abdu bil-abd, a slave for a slave, al-nisa bil-nisa, a woman for a woman. In other words, if a free man kills a slave, the punishment is not the same as if a slave kills a free man, and if a slave kills another slave, depends on whether it's a woman or a man. It's different treatments. So there are these distinctions, not only between man and a woman, but between a free person and a slave. Now, slavery was allowed in Judaism. It existed in Christianity, so this is not very new. That, but it shows that it also appears in the Quran. Now, the Quran makes another stride forward in that it indirectly endorses monogamy. It says, marry of the women who seem good to you. You can marry 2 of them, 3 of them, or 4 of them. However, if you fear that you will not be just to more than one, then you should only marry one wife. Or you can marry one of your slaves that your right hand possesses. And later on in the same chapter it says, you will never be able to deal fairly between women, even if it's your ardent desire to do so. So, so indirectly, it's actually stating that that you should only marry one wife, because you cannot be fair to them. Now, often there's also a question of what is the ruling of the Quran on dress code. This is not a very important subject in the Quran. It's very important for the women and for this day and age, but there are really two statements about dress code in the Quran. One is that, you know, there was a practice before Islam in the period of Jahiliyyah, in the period of ignorance, that they went around with their breasts exposed. So in the Quran it says that they should lower their gaze, guard their modesty, and that they should not display their beauty, and they should draw their veils. That's a headscarf. Headscarf. Khumar is the plural of kimar, is a headscarf. So that the headscarf that they used to use, put it over the front of your body. That's the extent that it actually states. The other one is a reference to jalabiyah. It says when you go out, when a woman goes out, wear an outer garment. And the way it occurs in the Quran is that God tells Muhammad what he should tell his wives and daughters, so that the believing women would also take note. It says, O Prophet, tell thy wives and daughters and the believing women that they should cast their outer garments over their persons. Now, the translation of the Quran is a tricky subject because you don't want to interpret. A lot of the translation, there are about 40 to 50 translations of the Quran into English. Most of them introduce interpretations, and that's not allowed in the Quran. It's interpretation or ta'wil, the word is ta'wil, or expounding on it, which is called tafsir. The Muslims weren't really allowed to do that. But that did not stop them from doing interpretive translations. So I'll just show you an example of this. This is why I put the Arabic, because then when you look at the Arabic, you know whether the translation is correct or not. That's very important. Here is Al-Hilali. This is a
Fananapazir? Sorry,
yes.
can I interrupt? Adatola has another really great question. He says, I was wondering why in certain countries women have to walk behind the men. Why women and men cannot...
Sorry, you have to speak a little louder.
Oh, sorry. So the question is, I was wondering why in certain countries women have to walk behind men, why women and men cannot hold hands, but yet men and men can hold hands and show emotions to each other in public. Did you get all that?
Yes, thank you. Again, those are not subjects which are part of their scripture. You know, there is a lot that has been introduced by people expounding on the scripture, and that occurs in every religion. For example, the Old Testament is not a very big book, and the Pentateuch, the 5 books of the Old Testament, are quite small books. And they are told in Deuteronomy that they should not add or subtract from the scripture. But the religious leaders of Judaism have added and subtracted. There are vast volumes of additions and subtractions to what Moses had said. And that is called the oral Torah. And that's what Christ had to contend with by the time he appeared. That was really suffocating the Jewish faith, and he had to liberate them from that law. The same exists in Islam. In Islam, there are vast volumes of hadith or tradition, and literally several 100,000 statements. So walking behind, you will find any hadith to support your thinking. But that's not what the Quran says, and that's not what the Quran doesn't say. Women should walk behind the man, or whether they can hold hands or not. Those are the views of the Muslim scholars and the tradition. And that has done a great disservice to both Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And I'll show you this example here. It says the same verse as above. Look how much more expanded it has become according to Al-Hilali, which is the official translation of Saudi Arabia. It says, "O Prophet," the ones in italics is actually part of the Arabic text. It says, "O Prophet, tell your wives and your daughters and the women of the believers to draw their cloaks all over their body." Well, the all over their body is doubtful, because it just really says over their bosoms. And it doesn't talk about veils, it says their cloak. And then here it says, to screen themselves completely except the eyes or one eye to see the way. Now, none of that appears in the Arabic. That the only way they can show themselves is in public is that they completely cover themselves, but they have a little hole for the eyes or for one eye to see the way. Those are all additions to the Quran, and it appears in their translations. So that allows a lot of abuse to occur in the name of the religion. So here is the widely varying interpretations of veiling in Islam. Three of them are definitely out. They don't fit what the Quran says. The one that fits is on the left, the hijab. You just cover the front with your headscarf. And also the one on the right is that you wear a cloak before you go out. The other three, the niqab, which you're only allowed to see the eyes, the burqa, which you're not even allowed to see the eyes, or the chador, which is used very much in Iran, where it should really cover everything except one eye, doesn't exist. It doesn't fit the definition. And then I put a modern version of veils and hijab, which I'm not quite sure that also fits with the definition in the Quran. But then this cloth and chastity was not just confined to the Quran. It's what these Muslim ladies are wearing are not too different from this nun, the habit of this nun. Anyway, today in the modern world, this has created a problem, and I'm sure you've heard of the controversial French ban on concealment of the face in public, the niqab shown on the left, and the burqa on the right, and whether this will be sustained, this ban, or whether it will be repealed completely, still remains. Now, there is a further step in the way the women are treated, and this affects the Baha'is because they are punished severely for the stance that they take on women, the equality of men and women, and the Quran is used very much to attack them. In the Baha'i writing, it says humanity is like a bird with its two wings. The one is male and the other female. The bird cannot really fly unless both wings are strong and impelled by some common force.
Dr. Fananapazir, I'm going to,
Yes.
sorry, interrupt you again. We got two questions.
Yes.
First one is from Nicole, and she's wondering why the burqa is so extreme. I assume what she means by that is why does it cover, why so much? What's the reason behind a woman being covered so thoroughly? And if you could also point out where in the Middle East, or in the Middle East region, the burqa is required, or heavily suggested, shall I say?
Again, I showed the two verses in the Quran that affects hijab, and those are very clear. Headscarf, cover the breasts, and have a loose outer covering when you go out. The rest of it is again tradition, and depends whether you are a Sunni in Afghanistan or a Shia in Iran. The burqa is very much part of Afghanistan, and the chador, the one that, you know, the black covering, and the woman just looks through with one eye, is in Iran, and some other Muslim countries, Saudi Arabia, burqa, and also in their enthusiasm, some women even in the West have started wearing the burqa, like those pictures in France, because they want to make a point that their religion, they're happy with what the religion tells them to do.
Thank you. And then one question from Justin. He says, basically, he's wondering what the issues of about the issues of Muslim women driving in Saudi Arabia. He says he knows that the Wahhabi faith is there in Saudi Arabia, but how is it that they interpret the Quran to not allow women to drive?
Again, that is the statement of their mullahs and their scholars and their mujtahids, and they pronounce on these things, and most of what they say is unwarranted as far as the Quran is concerned. It is notable that Khadija, the first wife of Muhammad, used to ride a camel. She used to have a very thriving business, and the camel was really the Mercedes-Benz of the desert. So, so she had much more freedom than the women do in Saudi Arabia at present time. So again, one has to differentiate between what's in the Quran, and the Quran was not supposed to be forever. The spiritual laws were supposed to be forever, but the social laws, according to the Quran, were only meant for a period of time, and that they would then be substituted for others. If you believe that the Quran is forever, and that's the position of the Muslim scholars, that this is a final and complete revelation from God, then you have a problem, because you either have to interpret the rulings according to more liberal standards, which does not sound very authentic, because if you've got the ability to change the Quran yourself, you might as well come up with your own religion. Then there are the conservatives, the fundamentalists, who say no, the Quran was from God and is forever. So both have problems. This is why I think something like the Baha'i faith is appealing, because it says, yes, you were correct in the past, you brought some great advances to society, you advanced civilization, but now, again, the world has to move on. And in that respect, the Baha'i faith states that men and women are absolutely equal, and they should have equal rights. In fact, it goes on to say that women are more intuitive, and that if you have a daughter and a son and you don't have enough money to send both of them to school, you should send the daughter to school, because the mother will be the first educator of the children. So here is really, I put this summary slide in, which summarizes the various abilities of women in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and the Baha'i faith. 4 is maximum, and so in social and public discourse, well, Judaism doesn't have much, allows much to happen. Christianity the same. Islam, the woman can now speak. She doesn't just have to ask her husband all the time. In the Baha'i faith, is 4 plus is absolute equality. A right to be heard judicially. There's no right in Judaism. The Jewish lady cannot defend herself in the court of law. A man has to speak for her in the Sanhedrin. In Christianity, as we saw, women cannot speak. In Islam, she can talk, but you need 2 women for every man, for every male witnesses. The Baha'i faith is equality. Whether they can own property, in Judaism, they can own property only if the father dies and doesn't leave a male heir. In Christianity, it's the same. In Islam, she can earn, she can have property, she can be heir to property, but only half that of a man. The number of wives allowed in Judaism, you're allowed more than 1 wife. In Christianity, you could have no wife, according to St. Paul, or you could have more than 1 wife. The only provision was that the bishop, it says, should be the husband of 1 wife. The clergy was supposed to have 1 wife, but others had more. In Islam, you could have 1 to 4, but it favors 1 because you cannot have justice. In the Baha'i faith, there is strict monogamy. Concubines are allowed in Judaism. It's not very clear in Christianity. In Islam, you definitely are allowed concubines. In the Baha'i faith, not at all. You could have female slaves in Judaism, Christianity, and is in Islam, and but not in the Baha'i faith. And female slaves had a position, again, much lower than free women. You could marry a female slave in Judaism. It allows you to do that in the Torah. In Christianity, doubtful. In Islam, you again, the recommendations that you can do so. In the Baha'i faith, absolutely not. The ability to divorce your husband, a woman to divorce her husband, in Judaism, there is no such thing allowed. But a man gives a bill of divorce, writes on a piece of paper that I've divorced you, gives it to the female, and she's divorced. In Christianity, divorce is forbidden, absolutely forbidden. Although even in the Catholic countries, that has now been reversed. In Islam, there is the woman has no ability to divorce her husband directly. In the Baha'i faith, a woman can divorce her husband and has equal to that of the husband. The ability of the husband to divorce is absolute in Judaism. It's not allowed again in Christianity. Christ says, let no man put asunder what God has brought together. In Islam, the husband is allowed to divorce, and the Baha'i faith, divorce is not regarded very highly, but it's allowed. Right of the husband to punish the wife. There are mentions of that in Judaism. It is not allowed in Christianity. They're supposed to love their wives. In Islam, as you saw, it's allowed. In the Baha'i faith, there is absolutely forbidden. Right over children, in Judaism, is absolutely that of a male. In Christianity, the same. In Islam, the same. In the Baha'i faith, both have equal rights over the children. prescriptions on female modesty. There's a lot of prescriptions on that in Judaism, in Christianity, in Islam, in the Baha'i faith. It applies to both of them. Inability to work, drive, or travel, that is with the permission of the husband or the father in Judaism, the same in Christianity, the same in Islam. In the Baha'i faith, they are absolutely free to travel. So, in summary, there seems to be gradually more and more progress about women's rights, and that's largely because I think it takes a lot to get the men on board, because they are so difficult. And women have always been equal. In fact, scientifically, they are more equal to men. They have 2 X chromosomes. We have 1 X chromosome and a piddly Y chromosome. It's of no significance. So these rights were a process of educating the men gradually over thousands of years, and today they have they have total parity in the Baha'i faith. So these are the social laws, and on top of that there are other additions by the clergy, by the institute, the synagogue, the church, and the mosque. They have added and added and added thousands of statements to what existed in the Quran, and those additions have in fact caused sectarianism because they can't agree on those things. The traditions are contradictory, they contradict each other, and they are written by men for men, and they add to the further subjugation of women. I would welcome any questions that you may have.
We have a question from Adatola. Let's see if I can go back and find it with all the great discussions going on here. Okay, got it. So Adatola has a question on honor killings. He says that he understands how important family honor is, but why is it taken to the extreme in parts of the Middle East, like beheading and those extreme circumstances? I think he's talking about honor killings.
Well, there is no honor killing in the Quran. So if they go back, go by what their scripture actually states, there is no such thing. It's, you know, as there's another reading of men are the supporters of women. When you support them and you protect them, you don't chop off their heads. And one of the, it's just a very, these are again additions. There's no such thing as honor killing it occurs in Hinduism and it occurs in Islam, and it has nothing to do with honor and nothing to do with faith. It's an aberration. It's a very cruel aberration. And you know, again, when you look at these religions, when it comes to adultery, for example, adultery, have you ever seen a man being stoned to death for adultery? It's always the women who get stoned to death. I mean, doesn't that take 2 people to tango? I mean, why is it that always you have the woman being stoned to death in some of these barbaric practices? And again, if you look at stoning to death, I'll use that as an example. Stoning to death, stoning is called rajm, R-A-J-M, rajm. It's not allowed in the Quran. It's not part of the Quran. It does exist in the Bible, stoning for adultery. You remember there was that woman who was caught in adultery, and he was brought before Christ, and they said, what should we do with him? And Christ says, with her, and Christ says, whoever is without sin, let him throw the first stone, and they all walked away ashamed. That was stoning because it was part of the Old Testament. Stoning doesn't occur in the Quran at all. So why do the Muslims in Afghanistan, in Iran, in Somalia stone women to death for adultery or for other crimes, it's because of a hadith, again, one of these traditions. One of the wives of Muhammad said that the original punishment that Muhammad had said was mandatory on a woman was not that she should be given lashes, but that she should be stoned to death. And she said that I had it written on on a piece of paper, and I had it in my tent. This is Aisha, the wife. Says, I had it in my tent, but a goat walked in and ate the piece of paper. So it's not in the Quran. A goat ate the piece of paper which contradicted the Quran, and now 1400 years later, in present civilization, women are stoned to death. It's a very, very sad reflection of things, and this is why I strongly believe that religion, which has so much power over people today, must be reformed and restated and revoiced to humanity, and they should get back to the really most important spiritual values, and change the social status of women and other social issues.
Okay, so we have a couple more questions along that line. Let's see. Okay, so Jackie's asking, doesn't it state in the Quran that men may have more than one wife if they can support and care for them all? And Tracy's elaborating on that and wondering, do they also have to provide houses for each of the women so that each family is cared for separately? How does that work?
So
no easy questions here, right?
No, these are very, very great questions. And actually, it's answered in this statement. This is a chapter 4 of the Quran is all on women. Nisa means women. And it says, again, to reiterate, it says you can marry the women who seem good to you. You can marry 1, you can marry 2, 3, or 4. So it puts the limit at 4. Remember that Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. But here, again, in Persia at that time, the emperors had several hundred wives. Here in the Quran, it tries to reduce it. I mean, it sounds extreme to us, 4 wives, but that's because we're judging these laws by standards 1400 years later. But in the Quran at that time, this was quite a restriction. Marry of the women who seem good to you, 2 of them, 3 of them, or 4 of them. However, if you fear that you will not be just to so many, then you should marry 1 only. And then, as I mentioned later on in the same chapter on women, it says, I don't think you are going to be able to deal fairly between women, between your wives, even if you desire greatly that should be so. You cannot be fair to 2 women. So indirectly, for the first time in religious history, it actually is basically indirectly stating that there should be monogamy. So we have to, when we consider these things, we have to consider under what circumstances was the Quran revealed. Is it in the Quran, or is it in one of these Sharia laws, in one of these additions and hadiths and reported hadiths, or is it one of the fatwas? There's another addition to this whole area and to all other areas on jurisprudence, on legal issues, and that is fatwa. Fatwa is a pronouncement by a Muslim cleric because he has been given the power to do so in Saudi Arabia by the king, and so they come up with fatwas. For example, one recent fatwa which came from Saudi Arabia was that there should be no synagogues or churches built in Arabia. They should be destroyed. That's a fatwa. That doesn't occur in the Quran. That's just the man's. It doesn't even appear in the Hadith probably. It's just his own personal opinion, which he states because he's speaking for God. And again, there is no justification for that. So there are a lot of fatwas against women, but the Quran itself says you can marry 1, 2, 3, or 4, but make sure you're going to be fair with them. Now, it begs the question: who can be fair to 4 women, or 3 women, or 2 women? It's difficult to be fair to 1 woman, as my wife would agree.
Perfect. I love that. I think that answers the question. Thank you, Dr. Fananapazir.
You've got good students. I can see from their comments to each other. If they have any other questions, please let me know. But those are the things. First of all, ask yourself, 1, is it a social law or a spiritual law? The spiritual law occurs in all these religions. If it's a social law, if it's to do with society, does it occur in the Quran, or is it because of one of these hadiths? Very many of them are fabricated, and one sect of Islam doesn't accept the hadiths of the other sects of Islam. They have their own compilation. So the actual things that they put into practice, the Sharia law, which they want to put into practice in Europe, in England, in America, in Canada, the Sharia law consists not only of the Quran, but also all these additions, the hadiths and the fatwas and all this elaborations, and that varies from whether you are a Hanafi or a Shafi, one of the sects of Sunni Islam, or are you a Ja'fari, the Shia sect in Iran. So
Ayatollah has another great question. This is a really big question, but I think you got great answers, so let's give this one a try. Ayatollah is wondering, what is the law of a man touching a woman in many of the Middle Eastern countries? I assume he means touching, like, Ayatollah, maybe you can elaborate. Do you mean touching, like, just holding hand on the streets, or do you mean touching as in, like, groping and, you know, yeah.
Well, I meant touching as in like if let's say you see someone in the mall and you go to touch their hand or shake their hand or just something like that.
That's a good question, Ayatollah. Thank you. That's these are all affect so many hundreds of millions of women and men in the Muslim world, and also to those who are not Muslims. I worked for about 20 years at the National Institutes of Health, and one of my patients would come directly from Jerusalem was a very orthodox Jew, and his son had a cardiac arrest, and he had born with the heart problems, and they came to the National Institutes of Health for us to figure out why this had happened and to prevent it from happening again. So when the rabbi and his wife and son came, I automatically shook the hand of the rabbi, and when I went to shake the hand of his wife, she jumped several feet backwards, and I realized that was a no-no. Now, there is really nothing. There is really nothing in the scripture that says that they have to do that, or in the Quran to do that. Those are again the restrictions placed on women and their contacts and innocent contacts is really part of their Sharia, part of their, but it's not as simple as that, because if you contravene those things, you might get accused of adultery or you might get stoned to death. So it's not innocuous, but it wasn't really part of their religion. In fact, you know, the Quran says if somebody greets you nicely, you should greet that person even more nicely in return. So she should have shaken my hand, as you know, the life of her son was in my hand, and as it happened, the life of her husband as well, because they had an inherited heart problem. But so these are. I also remember walking in Jerusalem, and there was a Rebbe, which is the really head of the tribe, a very Orthodox Jew, and none of the women or the men would make eye contact even with somebody like myself, because I was obviously part of the Goyim. The Goyim are the foreigners. So not only don't you touch the female, but they don't even associate with the Goyim. All they have in their book is that one day, when the Lord of Hosts comes, when the Messiah returns, then the Goyim and the Jews will get together. They will all be gathered together, and there will be unity. But you know, in the mosques today, or when you go to the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, the men and the women are separate. Also in the synagogues, they were also separate. Those things are not applicable today, and one of the reasons for studying the scripture is for their followers to realize, and for all humanity to realize, that the time has come when they must move on. The social laws, which may have been an advance 1400 years ago, no longer serve the best interest of humanity. They downgrade women and
sorry, Doctor.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Dr. Fananapazir. I love what you just said. Okay, so we have let's see. Aditola was just adding an additional part to the question he had, which was, he said that in Qatar, a man touched a woman in the mall and he was arrested, and when he was picked up, he was unrecognizable. So things did not go well for that man.
Yeah, that is not part of the Quran. Yeah. So what was Justin's experience in Qatar?
What's that? Justin's in Qatar? Yeah, Justin was stationed in Qatar for about 5 months, it looks like. Let's see. So Justin had a question he had a question about the ban on burqas in France, and I remember that when that came out, it was a pretty big deal. He wants to know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I know, you know, to be honest, if I was part of France has got such an important history where they broke away from injustice and equality, liberty. These are equality, liberty is very, very important. Is very important. Has been very important for them, and to suddenly find amongst them 4 or 5 million people, half of whom are women, and they obviously are either being forced or they force it on themselves to be completely clad in a burqa, is disturbing to them. And there are 30-40 million Muslims in Europe. They've not been able to integrate into that society, and also France has been hit very badly by terrorism. And so if you've got somebody who's completely covered up in burqa, you cannot really protect the country if you don't know whether this is a real person. Is it the woman? Is it the male? Is it carrying a bomb? they cannot protect their society, so they have a real issue, and to some extent one would sympathize with the plight they find themselves in. And but again, people were not sensitive to those issues. They're bringing a lot of pressure that, no, the women have a right to have burqas, and that's their right. Was there any questions?
I'm trying to think of any terms of coordination. How many slides do you have left, Dr. Fananapazir?
That was it.
Oh, that's the last one? Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Okay, so everybody, Dr. Fananapazir's lecture at this point, lecture 40, is complete. At this point, I want to turn over to questions you guys have. If you have any questions, go for it. And you're welcome to use your audio if you would like. Other than that, you can just use the chat box. Okay, Nicole, can you,
the lady called Amanda has appeared. Maybe she has a question on the subject.
Okay, everybody. Well, some of you had trouble hearing me, so I'm going to try and speak up. So at this point, go ahead and ask questions that you have. You may turn on your audio as long as you turn it off as soon as you're done asking the question. That way we don't have a lot of feedback going on. Okay, so feel free to ask questions, type, or use audio.
Hi, Dr. Fananapazir. This is Justin.
Hi, Justin.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for the speech you're giving tonight. But I have a question on Saudi Arabia and with the driving issue. That a lot of people in the Western cultures are advocating for the women to drive, but I've also heard that it is having a devastating effect for the women in the country because the outside influence pushing for it is not coming from within, which doesn't help their cause very well. And what your thoughts on that are?
Yeah, it's very important not to push causes that would result in a backlash. But again, the wife of Muhammad. The wife of Muhammad, Khadija, who was very beloved by Muhammad, and while she was his wife, he never married another lady, and Khadija had the biggest caravans. Twice a year they would go to the north towards Syria, and half of the year they went south to Yemen. It was the most profitable caravans in Mecca, and she herself rode a camel. History says she rode a camel in public, and that was the foremost mode of travel. That women in the 21st century cannot ride a car is intolerable, and the pressures that must come is not just women. The social laws of Islam, of the Quran itself, not only about women, are not tenable in this day and age. The laws governing slaves, the laws governing any human behavior are just not correct today, and they should be given freedoms. But the West has also got to be, the Westerners have also got to be fair. They have to also judge how come they have deviated so much from their religion and what the Gospels say they should do. It's again because a time comes when the social laws of a dispensation of a religion have to be replaced. In the Quran it says Tabaddala, means he will replace those laws. In the Quran it says that a time will come when there will be the Ajal of Islam, of the Sharia of Islam. Ajal means a predestined end termination. So the subject is much bigger than just whether they're allowed to travel or not. Cutting off their hands for theft. Now that's very good at probably curing a rise in robbery and stealing, but is not acceptable in this day and age. The man now is unable to earn a living, so he's in a worse situation. He may have stolen something trivial, he gets his hand chopped off, and then if he does it again, if he's got a medical condition where he repeats the problem, then he can get the other hand chopped off. I mean, and in Saudi Arabia, that's done by giving a local anesthetic in some cases, so he doesn't feel the pain, and after the hand is chopped off, he's carted off to a hospital for post-operative care. They think that brings the whole thing into modern-day civilization. But again, as I was brought up by Christian missionaries in Africa, I studied Islam while I was a medical student in Scotland, in Edinburgh, and when one looks at the history of that time, these social laws of Islam were a great advance on what had happened. Women were given much more rights in the Quran than had occurred previously, but they are not applicable in this day and age. And until we face that, and the West that does business with these countries, and one of the issues that was raised at one of the economic meetings that I attended was, how can we help the Muslim countries if 51% of their workforce isn't allowed to drive and isn't allowed to earn a living and doesn't have access to higher education? The answer is that, yeah, it's a problem. And what happens in the Muslim world also affects the whole world economy. That's a very large faith, 1.2 billion people. So it affects the economy of the world, and 51% are women. So what happens to them affects all of us.
Dr. Fananapazir, I love how you mentioned the education bit there. We're actually gonna talk about Baha'i education and education in the Middle East quite a bit in coming modules. I know that I have a few students that want to ask questions. Let me go ahead and ask. I think it was Jackie's question, and then I'll let the other students come on. So Jackie has a question about the Kurdish. She's wondering if the Kurdish follow the same social and religious laws as the rest of whatever country they're in.
No, the social laws are not the same whether you're in Egypt or Afghanistan. A lot of these countries realize, and they've realized for a long period of time, what I've been saying is that these laws are not applicable today. So side by side, the Sharia law, they have their own national laws which take precedence in the Sharia over the Sharia law, and but there is all the time movements in these countries for the Sharia law to be restored, and then there are countries that today are fully controlled by the Sharia law. Again, remember, that's not only the Quran, but all these additions that have been put into place, unjustified additions. So Iran is under Sharia law, but it's under the Sharia law of Shia Islam. It's called Ja'fari jurisprudence. So their social laws are a Shia jurisprudence, and that is not quite the same as, say, Afghanistan, which is under a Sunni or jurisprudence, or Somalia or Mali, there are more Sunni countries than Shia countries, and so there are 4 or 5 sects of Sunni Islam, and each one of them has their own Sharia. So, no, it can be quite different from one country under Islam than another country, and then a country can be Muslim in name, but have its own national imperatives, which try to put some reason into the whole process. It's like in certain European countries, or in the States, or in Canada, where for example, the Canadian government has its own laws, but then the Muslim communities would like to put into place their Sharia, and if they put that into place, particularly if the women are for it, they have to realize that they will be heavily restricted under those laws. And so the West doesn't know how to treat this. They want to give them their freedoms to operate their religion the way they see fit, but there is a lot of apprehension from some of the Muslims themselves.
Okay, so I know that Adatola and Tracy have questions. I'm going to give them a chance to use their audio. If not, then I'll ask whatever they think.
Very good.
Hi, Doctor. I was just wondering, with me growing up in Nigeria, I grew up around a lot of Sunni Muslims, and but I was wondering why now, because of ISIS, why is all of a sudden this Sunni Muslim or whatever they want to call themselves, why are they so extreme now? I mean, what happened between now and 30 years ago that just changed the whole thing to make him more, I guess, make this group more destructive?
Well, there's a lot of misunderstanding of that. It's just that there's some rebellion against Westerners, and that's in the name of Boko Haram, isn't that right? Something that's not to do with the West. That's what Boko Haram says. And they have gradually, this hasn't just happened in the past 30 years, it's become very much more important in the past 30 years, but, for a long period of time, the Muslims have been wondering, and those are the beginnings of Al-Qaeda in Egypt. The leaders were in prison in Egypt. They were under the influence they came under influence of individuals who said that, we were great at one period of time in history. We had conquered half of the world, we had advanced sciences, we had advanced arts, architecture. The world looked upon Islam as the epitome of what was good and what was civilized. And maybe it was because we had, this is one of the statements from Sayyid Qutb in Egypt, that's the beginnings of Al-Qaeda. Maybe if we went back to the original teachings, maybe we've not adhered to the fundamentals of our religion. If we just adhere to the fundamentals of our religion, then we would be in a better state. We would not be in an inferior state compared to the West, which seems to have all the glory. So they then tried to then restore the caliphate. The caliphate was a vast area of the world under the Ottoman Empire, under the Turks. and where the Sharia law was operational. And so they tried to create the same condition, to restore that caliphate, which got abandoned when the Ottoman Empire was destroyed in after the Second World War. So they tried to restore that, but in the mix they also are under the influence of their religious leaders, and who teach them a lot which wasn't really part of the original Islam. There was none of this injustice. So they're characterized by cruelty which is unprecedented and is not part of Islam. In Islam, it says, in the Quran, it says, you know, God has commanded justice. And the beginning of the Quran, the first line says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. In other words, Muslims are supposed to portray, be the image of that mercy and justice and compassion. But what they do is very remote from that. It says, if your enemy, in the Quran says, if your enemy that you're fighting wants to make peace, grab the peace. That God is the Adil, he's the just, he's the Muhsit, he's the equitable. So he's a just God, he's an equitable God, he's a merciful God, he's a compassionate God, he's a God that orders them to have justice. And it says that in the Quran, it says that if you kill one person unfairly, then it's as if you've killed the whole world. If you save one person, it's as if you've saved the whole world. So they are not adhering to the Quran, but also what they adhere to is something which, in its social context, is really is not applicable today. So there are many issues facing Islam. I wrote a book after 9/11. I wrote a book called Islam at the Crossroads, and it has 19 chapters. You can get it from Amazon, and every chapter deals with one of the issues that the Quran is facing. And there are so many issues that they have to face. One of the issues is their religious leaders. And in the Quran, some of the worst language is used against the religious leaders who mislead their people. Another problem the Quran says is imitation. Do not imitate. Do not follow what others say. In fact, if you follow the majority, you're likely to be wrong, it says in the Quran. So their lives, their religion, when somebody says, I'm a Muslim, that doesn't mean that he has investigated Islam necessarily. Very likely he's inherited the religion, and religion is not something that you inherit. Like science, it should be the product of investigation and not just a matter of inheritance. You shouldn't, with the furniture which you inherit from your father, you should not inherit his religion as well. But the world is beset by imitation. They just imitate each other. A person is a Jew because his parents were Jews. A Christian, is a Methodist, is a Catholic, whatever. Is not in every case, but in most cases it's because it is they follow their ancestors. And they have to learn to see with their own eyes and to hear with their own ears, to understand with their own hearts, it says in the Quran. They are deaf, they are dumb, and they say they cannot be changed, it says in the Quran. Summun bukmun. So it is the individual, the fault of not only their leaders, religious leaders, and that's a huge hierarchy, you know, from the ordinary Talabeh. The Talabeh is basically a low-level student of religion to their mujtahids high up that can actually make statements equivalent to that of the Quran. That they have to get rid of these. Humanity should investigate faith for themselves, and they should follow what Christ told them. By their fruits you shall recognize them, Christ said. A good tree, says, brings forth good fruit. A bad tree can never, he says, bring forth good fruit, nor can a good tree ever bring bad fruit. Therefore, he says, study them not because of their names, but evaluate them because of the fruits. And the fruits of religion, the Baha'i Faith states, should be love, compassion, unity, and the advancement of women, advancement of society, increasing their education, and that should be their prerogative. But you know, that's how they should assess something. But if it causes divisions, in the Quran it says, do not cause divisions either in your religion, and the religion in the Quran is defined as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It says, do not divide your religion, nor divide Islam, nor divide it into sects. So they look at each other with the eyes of division and foreignness, that you are something other. Humanity is one. When I was at the National Institutes of Health, we decoded the genome, the DNA of a pygmy from South Africa, a tall Norwegian, and many other groups that were analyzed together. The DNA showed humanity was scientifically one. Today, in the name of religion, humanity is divided. Its two equal genders are divided. One suppresses the other because brute force was what was important before. It's no longer, brute force is no longer valid today. And education plays an enormous part. And that poor girl that, was shot in the head. I think she was from Pakistan. She was shot in the head. Yes, that she wanted to promote education for women. And there are two women in Iran who are at the moment in one of the worst prisons in Tehran, Baha'i women who were part of the Baha'i organization leaders. And women play a major role in Baha'i activities. And yes, you couldn't have equality of men and women 4,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 1,400 years ago. But if you examine the scripture, you'll find that there was a gradual progression. Faith has to progress, has to evolve. You cannot have a truth revealed 1,400 years ago that will be relevant today. Society has changed. The world wasn't fully discovered 1,400 years ago. The world is different today. And so the social laws must be adapted to present-day society, except that that cannot be done very effectively by human beings. That is why God, from time to time, re-reveals His purpose to humanity, and that carries with it the transformation necessary for such vast changes.
Dr. Fananapazir, I'm going to interrupt here because I can kind of see Tracy's trying to ask her question. So I'm going to kind of give her an opening here.
Yeah, please, Tracy.
Oh, sorry about that. I have a friend who lives down in Karachi, and he was telling me about how much he hates shows like Homeland, etc., because they're racist, which he's right. But do you think shows like that in turn kind of make a bitterness between MENA region nations?
I must say that's one of my favorite shows because I think it's very cleverly done. But you know, I think the more important thing, you shouldn't start thinking just as a Muslim. I mean, but there's no such thing as a Muslim nowadays. There's so many different variations, and from liberals to conservatives to fundamentalists to Wahhabis to the Shias in Iran. Yeah, I think the West has to be sensitive to these sensibilities, but we have to start thinking whatever our background is, whether we are from a Jewish background, or a Christian background, or from a Muslim background, or one of the thousands of denominations of these religions, you know, we have to start thinking as humanity. We are all one. And what is it that serves all humanity? And reacting to one series on television and another doesn't really answer the real issues that affects humanity. We have so many problems, and we have to concentrate on our oneness. The oneness of humanity, the realization of the oneness of humanity is a very, very critical thing. In the Baha'i writings it says, if you want peace and security, well, the peace and security of the world will not happen unless you have the oneness of humanity, when human beings see each other as one, not as many, but as one. Unity in diversity. They should look at the diversity as part of the beauty of the whole rather than something to react to. So it shouldn't be a Jew versus a Christian, a Muslim versus a Jew, a Hindu versus a Buddhist in Sri Lanka, you know, Sunnis versus Shias, Catholics versus Protestants in Northern Ireland. You know, those things are not part of God's faith. If there is a God, which I believe there is, He's a good God. He wants good for humanity, and the product of His faith is good, and He has to be judged by that. But, you know, so, and you cannot have the oneness of humanity. If you want peace and security, you have to have the oneness of humanity, but you cannot have the oneness of humanity if you have the oneness of religion, the oneness of faith. So this is why, you know, religions have to regard themselves as the different phases of one common faith. Until they do that and they come to love and respect each other, and that they've all added to the past history of that great faith, then the world will be beset with problems. Since my last talk, I hear that Washington, your beautiful state, which I visited, has also had a terrorist attack. It's going to grow. It's going to be a problem because the politics are politics of division. The religions are religions of different denominations, different faiths. But the reality is one. Just as humanity is scientifically one, it should also recognize that they have a common heritage.
All right, thank you, Dr. Fananapazir. Okay, so I know, Zabina, are you here? I don't remember how long we promised Dr. Fananapazir.
Yes, I'm here.
Huh. Are we over our time?
We're fine. I'll let you decide, though. We have to remember that poor Dr. Fananapazir is 3 hours ahead of us.
Yeah.
No, I'm wide awake and enjoying the questions, and I would love to hear some more if there are more. There was a lady, Amanda, that walked in late, but maybe she has a question. I don't think I've heard a question from her. But any of the latecomers, if they have any questions or
perfect, Tracy. Okay, well, I mean, I love how you just finished there, Dr. Fananapazir. You're talking about the oneness of humanity. But if you want to take up more questions, we can open the floor again. It's up to you. I know it's 10:30 your time, so I don't want to push you too late, especially with Sushi wanting his dinner and all that.
It's been lovely being with you all, and you have a great students and great questions. And I'm really very privileged to have been part of your discussions. And I wish you all the best of luck, and I hope that you continue to investigate these things from not prejudiced sources, but from unbiased sources as possible, and it should make sense. Religion should make sense, and if religion doesn't make sense, then it's not religion. If religion doesn't cause unity, it's no religion. And so I just hope that you continue in your investigations. You know, the title of the book that I wrote, Islam at the Crossroads, comes from Jeremiah. Jeremiah says, if you come to a crossroad and you don't know whether you should take the left or the right road, see where you've come from. Examine your past. Examine where you've come from, and then you will know how to proceed. So the individual has to, again, if I can finish with this thought again, is that that we as individuals should investigate and not inherit and copy our forefathers. You know, as Christ says, ask, seek, and knock. If you don't knock, the door will never be opened. So again, I'm very, very, very proud to have been with you this evening, and I hope I will do this again.
Thank you, Dr. Fananapazir, and I really want to highlight what you said about individual investigation, particularly for my students. That we've talked about that since the beginning of the course. Individual investigation, not relying on others to tell you what to think or see or hear, but to seek out your own sources. And maybe not every source can be objective, but it's that individual investigation, the questioning of why, and examining your own evidence for your own conclusions is absolutely critical. So,
yeah, I mean, if I walked into that premier institute of research, the National Institutes of Health, and said, you know, I know the answer to this scientific question because I just happen to inherit the knowledge. You know, I remember my father or my mother said this about this truth. They would have thrown me out into the street in a few seconds. You know, but again, the scientists who were there, but again from these religions, and every Friday, some of them would go to the synagogue on Fridays, some of them would go to the mosque, and some of them on Sunday would go to the church, and they would just follow blindly what they had inherited. That if you're gonna deal with these issues which affect the modern world, we have to have a modern approach, and that requires the God-given right of the individual to investigate the truth and to judge it by its fruit. Anyway, before I get into another long, then I need to sign off.
Okay.
Well, I just on behalf of the Uniting Hearts Academy and the Unity Museum, which stands for a Baha'i Perspective on Peace, we just want to thank everybody today. We want to thank Dr. Fananapazir for having done just a brilliant job. We love your slides, and I hope that we all have a chance to go through them again and look at your recording again, because there was a lot of really very valid information, especially for Western living youth that are trying to struggle with these cultural differences. So it was a brilliant job, and thank you, Christina, for making this happen today. And I just hope that all of our students and friends up there in Everett will come and visit our Unity Museum, and hope Christina, you'll come back and visit us soon. Maybe we'll all have dinner together.
Sushi, yes.
Yes, I look forward to that. I was really impressed by that museum when I was in Seattle. What a incredible operation and opportunity for people to learn. And while I was there were 25 students, was it, from North Carolina that had
Yes.
driven all the way and visited it. And there were so many people just walking in. A couple from Australia wanting to see it.
Well, we got a couple of weeks ago,
Well,
we had 279 people there within 3 hour period. It was a busy day.
wow, yeah.
So we are, it's just one by one, and thank you very much. And is there anything, Christina, we can help you with or assist you if questions come up in a follow-up period that would like to ask some further questions? Just sort of feel free to contact Dr. Fananapazir, and I'm sure he'd be happy to further assist.
Yes, my email address is fananapazir@gmail.com.
Easy.
If you fananapazir@gmail.com. If you have any questions, and this is a really large area, then please email me, and I will promise I will respond.
Definitely. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and, because I know it's getting late. Again, I just want to echo really quickly all the thank yous of the students. I don't know if you can read them, Dr. Fananapazir, but you've got just like a whole row of thank yous from the students. And a thank you for Sabina as well for arranging this for us. Thank you so much. I really say that you've added critical thinking and curriculum to this classroom, and I think you've changed some hearts and minds here today, and I really appreciate that.
The pleasure is all mine. It's really a great honor. And we've got two ladies, very powerful ladies, running this whole thing.
Who, us?
And that rocks the cradle there.
That's a sign of, that's a sign of times.
Well, you are just a very, very sweet man. We all appreciate you. I better stop the recording before we get carried away.
Yeah, otherwise we'll keep going. So from my students, in Farsi, there's two different ways you can say thank you in Farsi. You can say the French merci, or you can say mutashakkiram. And so we'll say merci mutashakkiram to Dr. Fananapazir. And so let's go ahead, and I want to thank everybody for coming, and let's go ahead and sign off. And I will talk to my students. I will talk to you guys over announcements, emails. I will also have the discussion board available for you to complete your assignment. Later tonight, I'm hoping. And then, of course, Dr. Fananapazir and Sabina, I will definitely email the two of you, and so we can, touch base.
Okay, good night, everybody.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Oh, sorry, Christina, were you done?
Oh, yeah, I'm good. If you want to stay on, Sabina, you and I can chat for a minute.
Okay, yeah, I'll stay on and I'll stop the recording.